shame and the Parole Board. Brent faced the three members of the Parole Board across the shiny black desk of their spacious but modestly furnished office, in their small but pleasantly cut-off space station orbiting the dark, ferocious landscape of Deltroid. It's from this space station that the officials and engineers would overlook the smooth running of the foul colony below. Officials and engineers that were important enough to be kept at a safe distance from the planetoid's brutal weather and all of those pesky convicts and prison officers that inhabited it. The sound of silence was a constant ring in Brent's ears, and the clear air stung his nose. It was a dramatic contrast to the constant sound of howling winds blasting grit and rock into the metal huts, and his nose was already running in streams of muddy clay, trying to eject the dust that had accumulated in his sinuses over the past 18 months. The stern-looking human, sat importantly in the centre of the three members of the Parole Board, flicked through the footage on the hologram display that floated above the desk in front of him. Brent could easily make out from the reverse side of the displays that they were monitoring the aftermath of Clav's little outburst in the recreation centre only this evening. Stern raised his head, peered over the top of his bifocal lenses, and spoke through his thin lips. "Mr. Lagwater." "Please, call me Brent." "Mr. Lagwater," Stern continued, ignoring Brent's offer. "You'd be lucky to get off this rock at all after the ruckus down below," he sneered. After a short pause, he added, "Explain." Brent fidgeted his bulky body in the small hover chair, which almost touched the floor as it bobbed underneath him. He cleared his throat, wiped his nose, and adjusted his weight once again before speaking. "I was trying to leave peacefully," he croaked timidly, although his timid croak was too loud, as though he was still trying to talk over the weather below. "Clavlin gets, well, he gets irate when he has to leave. It's not his fault. He's just, well, he's an idiot. He needs a little more than an hour to mentally prepare himself to leave, that's all." The snooty woman to the right of Stern crossed her legs and leant back in her chair. "If he wants to stay, it can be arranged," she said. "No," Brent snapped. "For crying out loud, don't tell him that. He thinks that's what he wants, but it isn't." Stern shrugged and turned his nose up as though he disagreed. It was the Galawaxian lizard on Stern's left that tried to steer this parole examination away from the topic of Clav and back to Brent. "And what about you, Mr. Lagwater? How do you feel to be leaving?" "Great. Really, really great." He hesitated, unsure of whether he sounded authentic or not. "Listen, I'm well past 30 now, and I'm not getting any younger. The sands of time are running out on me, and I know I haven't reached my potential yet." "And what do you consider is your potential?" Stern asked. "Success," Brent declared wholeheartedly, to a chorus of unimpressed and cynical snorts from his three examiners. "I feel that I could easily run a successful and legitimate business. I've had time to think, and I can see that this pursuit for quick and easy credits is a lost cause in the long run. I realise now that all of the time spent in here only ever puts me back to the start." 3 nods of approval and 3 quick shorthand notes on their data pads lifted Brent's confidence slightly. He seemed to have said the right thing. "And what business do you see yourself in?" Mrs. Snooty inquired. "Still transporting stolen goods?" Brent, shamefaced but confident that he had finally changed his ways, made eye contact with the 3 across from him, and for the first time took in their appearances. Stern was a thin and wispy man, whose elongated features suggested that maybe he had a spot of Yersal trader in his genetic structure. He had sacs under his bespectacled eyes, and a grey beard that pointed to an unfeasibly large Adam's apple that protruded his skinny neck. Brent could easily snap this man with one hand, under different circumstances, but here in this room Stern was all-powerful and completely belittling. A coldness about him that reeked of authority. Brent assumed that he'd probably wanted to be some kind of officer in the Space Corps, but failed on account of his being too thin and wispy. Snooty, on the other hand, was a humongous woman, who to call portly or chubby would be like calling a cloud scraper a bungalow, and each bosom could easily have been incubating a small clone army. She had false-looking barrister's hair, and too much rouge on her cheeks. Her chins and neck seamlessly merged into her fat head, and she carried an air of authority painted across her face that could best be described as ferocious. Brent could tell that she liked to think of herself as one of the high society, but holding a job like this suggested otherwise. Regardless, she too intimidated Brent, and he wasn't so sure that he could win against her if it came down to fisticuffs, no matter what the circumstances. The Galawaxian lizard was the only one of the three that Brent didn't feel he could read, and not because Brent was speciesist, not at all. He was just ignorant. They really did all look the same to him. Lizards with scales and revolving lifeless eyes on the side of their rectangular reptilian heads, and ears that were simply holes in their necks. Brent didn't know how to identify this creature, but he definitely didn't trust it as it sat statue still, its focus and attention fixated on the convict in the small hover chair. The convict thought that at any given moment the beast could spring to life and bite his head off, or snare him in his extendable tongue, although he wasn't completely certain that Galawaxian lizards even had extendable tongues. Snooty continued, "Will you be transporting stolen goods, Mr. Lagwater?" "You mean smuggling?" Brent asked. He laughed as though the idea was absurd to him now. "No, definitely not." Snooty squinted with one eye and peered at Brent through the other. "So, smuggling is definitely not an option." Brent adjusted himself on the hovering seat, this time relaxing a little, crossing his legs and leaning backwards with his hands together in his lap, until he realised that he must look feminine as opposed to sophisticated, and so amended himself to a slouch, opened his legs, and scratched his scrotum. "Smuggling is the worst job ever. It's brain dead. There's no skill involved. It's a lot of loading and unloading and sitting in a craft going crazy with boredom in deep space. All that wasted time I could be doing something constructive. Some of my worst days ever have been on the hyperlanes. I wouldn't choose it unless I was really desperate." "So what would you do?" Lizard asked, then adding, "given the chance," as though he knew that the chances for Brent on a planet as close to the gutter as Marcellius were next to zero. "I have a love for sportscraft, high-spec speeders. I'd love to start a business converting standard vessels into high-spec models." "So you're somewhat of a mechanic?" Snooty queried. "And do you have any qualifications to say so?" He dropped eye contact when he muttered, "No, I don't. I'm self-taught." "So," Stern piped up, "what has prevented you from putting yourself through training or pursuing this career?" "Funds," Brent answered. "Or lack of." "Indeed," Stern said with a pomposity that seemed to answer 1,000 unspoken questions. "And what's going to be different this time? Do you suddenly have the funds?" "No." "And where do you suppose you will get these funds to help you aid your venture?" Stern piled it on with a patronising knowingness, adding, "this time around. I'll start to apply for work, save any earnings that I make, and I'll apply for grants or apprenticeships." "Mr. Lagwater, we have been here before, haven't we?" "Yes," he peeped. "Time and time again." Stern pointed at the display floating above his desk. "Obviously, past recordings of previous parole meetings, with keywords highlighted. Words like legitimate, stay out of trouble, and find a job." "Yes," Brent nodded, still looking anywhere but towards his parole officers. He hated this patronising charade. He knew they were going to release him, they always did, but not before putting him through this degrading song and dance. By using the tips of his fingers, Stern began to flick the luminous floating words around above his desk. "Only 3 years ago you stated in this very same room, 'I am going to go and find a legitimate home improvement business. No crime this time, honest.'" He looked up from the display. "So what happened?" "I needed cash for equipment and tools, and so I went shipping goods with Clav." "The term shipping," Snooty chipped in, "puts me in mind of regulated vessels transporting and distributing legal cargo from planets and systems whilst abiding to the various rules of legislation." Brent nodded coolly in agreement, but his pursed lips clasped tight together. One of his tells of guilt. "Yep," he chirped. "Yet, upon your apprehension, you were found in possession of a complete hold full of illegal and stolen goods, including empty iridium canisters which you had previously offloaded whilst being pursued by law enforcement officers. As soon as we realized that it was iridium, we knew we had to get rid of it." Brent offered his feeble explanation. "We were only trying to do the right thing." Doing the right thing in that case was probably notifying the police and explaining yourself, Snooty said. Yeah, right, Brent added defiantly. The wrong thing to do was to empty those canisters of iridium into the atmosphere of a listed planet, she shrieked. There was a pause long enough for Brent to begin to think he was supposed to say something. It's idiots like you that are the reason we are battling universal warming at the moment. Also, Lizard thought he'd chime in now, also reading from the notes hovering in front of him. You were harbouring a known felon. A commuter, Brent tried. A known felon wanted in 7 systems. I didn't know that at the time. Yet you were in possession of his autobiography, My Life on the Run, stored upon your datapad. It was on my datapad, but it wasn't mine. Yet it had a personal recorded message for you on its introduction, which incidentally also featured yourself listing all the felon's, quote, greatest achievements, unquote. What you hadn't thrown overboard was just as telling as what you had. Stern rejoined this assassination with a list. 7 crates of unrestricted laser cannons, 3 modified surveillance droids, all reported stolen from a Primarian naval vessel only days before in the Sharts quadrant. 250 kilos of Cimerian rock with a street value of 8,000 credits, and a container of Poldark rum lifted from a ship that was simply stopping over at Horizon 7. Brent was stumped. The job had been going well up until that final lift. The rum had been his idea, a bonus lift that they had stumbled upon whilst refuelling at the craft stop of Horizon 7, and a haul that would have brought them in as steady additional income once they got back to Marselius. It was greedy, and it turned out to be one haul over the line. They were spotted at the services, and that's how they got nicked. Brent shrugged. His pursed lips began to tremble ever so slightly, before parting just enough for him to pass one word between his lips. Circumstance. It seemed that Stern already knew what was coming and couldn't bear to sit through it. Yes, of course. Bad area, bad upbringing, but now you're reformed, correct? Brent's eyes darted across at the 3 of them. Was this a trick question? To say yes seemed dreadfully easy and abhorrently obvious. Dare he? Yes, he said. And when you get back to Marselius and need some quick credits to buy the equipment that you require. This was like painting by numbers, Brent thought. They were obviously wrapping this meeting up. I will find work, he said, the word rolling bitterly off his tongue. Work. It tasted sour like the bitter froth of a dankened snail. I find your dishonesty unappealing and not at all convincing, Stern explained, his remark accompanied by agreeing nods from either side. But honestly, Brent began. Stern spoke over him, and I am entirely sure that within the year we at the Deltroid detention facility will once again be blessed with your all-apologetic and remorseful self, head hung in shame and tail firmly wedged between your legs. So, how many chances should a man of your pathetic pedigree be allowed before we decide not to bother any more? Why, Mr. Lagwater, should we bother to even release you? Because even if I end up in here again, I can help keep Clav away for a damn sight longer than he could on his own. The look on their faces said it all. So Brent effectively punctuated it with, if I stay, Clav will be back here in a matter of weeks. The 3 huddled together and debated in muted whispers. When they slowly fanned apart, Stern placed his hands together on his desk in front of him, looked Brent straight in the eye and said, You're free to go. Aggressive, stubborn, violent, abusive, foul-mouthed. Stern read from the floating notes in front of him as Clav sat opposite, his head rising and falling dozily on his shoulders, his eyes trying to focus on, well, anything at all, actually. When Brent had returned to the waiting room, having been pardoned from his grilling and, thankfully, his prison term, he had found his friend high on subterranean mushrooms, coiled in a fetal position beneath the row of seats, his jaw clamped over the bottom half of his face, and his eyes, like endless black holes, stared through the universe. Brent shook his head and looked over the handful of convicts scattered around the waiting room. Has he got any better? Brent asked. Well, he almost drowned in an imaginary sea of couscous, one convict, a tiny silver-haired, pig-faced creature, said. But he managed to find a panic room deep within the Chamber of Doubt, another convict explained, eventually adding, where he's been ever since. Brent shook his head, crouched down to his friend's level and woke him for his own personal parole analysis in the only way that Brent knew how to wake Clav from any intoxicated coma. Clav, there's a joint for you, he lied, and immediately his friend had returned to our world. Well, sort of. Clav was annoyed when he realised he'd been conned, but Brent stood him up and coaxed him towards the parole office door. Come on, bud, straighten up. Just for 10 minutes. After the grilling I just got, you are going to get slaughtered in there in this state. I'll be all right, Brent. You know what those idiots are like. They'll be glad to see the back of us. And he had waltzed into the office with the blasé attitude of someone high on shrooms who didn't actually care if he was released or given an extension on his term. Thief, alcoholic, drug addict, sex addict, Stern continued in the parole office. Clav's brain, under the near-lethal intoxication of the subterranean fungus, was playing tricks, to say the least. He was mesmerised as the three members of the parole board continuously shape-shifted in front of him. Stern had gone from a sad-looking clown to a sackful of puppies, which pleased Clav immensely, and he rose to retrieve one of the cute infant dogs, only to have the ferocious dinosaur to the right of the pup snap at him, its blood-soaked jagged teeth gnashing as it roared, "Stay seated, please, sir." "Holy fuck!" Clav startled, drawing his hand back in an instant. He cautiously sat back down as Stern continued to read Clav's attributes from the digital file in front of him. Clav paid him no mind. He was too busy eyeing the T-Rex into submission. Offensive, selfish, wily, sly, untrustworthy, unsavoury, Stern continued, now a talking donut in Clav's mind's eye. Unhygienic, unemployable, rude, ignorant, arrogant, dim-witted, narrow-minded. Beside the donut to the left, Snooty had become an adjustable wrench, opening and closing her steel jaw. By the time he turned to face Stern again, he had turned from a donut into a calculator with 5,318,008 written across his display. Clav turned his head as close to upside down as he could and sniggered. "Boobies," he chuckled. Stern halted, turned briefly to the wrench on his left and then to the old snakeskin boot on his right before concluding his prisoner's endless list of unfavourable attributes. Callous, inconsiderate, naive, and stupid, Stern finished. "So, Mr. Hopper, when asked to fill in the form, did you not consider listing any of your good points?" he asked. "Was I supposed to?" "Well, yes, generally the idea is to try and sell yourself," Snooty snorted, as she became a cartoon pig. "With a list as comprehensive as this, you could have put down honest too," Stern laughed, "but I agree that stupid is probably more fitting." "Mr. Hopper," the boot leaned forward, morphing into an octopus, eyeing in a midget, "just out of interest, if you had to list your good points, what would they be?" Clav thought for a while. Then, after somewhat of a eureka moment, he blurted, "I could drink any of you under the table." And then, in another eureka moment, he added the answer that he probably should have said all along. "Oh, and I'm a fucking great pilot. I know the systems like the back of my ham." 3 nods of approval. "And I'm a great dad, too. I got 4 or 7 kids. I guess that my sperms are still good, which is surprising after all the drugs that I've taken." He smiled at the octopus, and then, as an afterthought, he added, "Oh, and I can do a lot of drugs, too." The octopus began to tie its tentacles in impossible knots over the desk as it spoke. "Well, you did make 2 good points." "I did?" Clav asked. "Yes, you did," Snooty added, turning from a cartoon pig into some kind of tapestry. "A lot of people would kill to have such skills. In fact, they could ensure any law-abiding citizen a stab at a relatively high-profile career." Clav beamed and looked at the tapestry as if she was nuts, which she swiftly turned into, actually, a life-sized bag of dry-roasted peanuts. "Really? You can get a good career for drinking? Wow, that's good to know, actually, because I've been drinking since I was about 6 years old." He nodded proudly. "I'm a natural." The 3 hallucinations rolled their eyes simultaneously. "I was referring to your knowledge of space travel and the systems," Snooty spelt out. There are only a handful of people who are made for long-haul interstellar space travel, Mr. Hopper, and it sounds to me like you are one such person. It's just a shame that you have had so many convictions, as no law-abiding transportation or haulage company would dare have you on their books. Yeah, I know. That's why I end up smuggling. There's fucking good money in it. Well, Mr. Hopper, unfortunately for you, if we were to let you out, you would have to remain under lockdown, and your ship would be heavily restricted to keep you in close proximity of your home planet. I'm afraid your smuggling days would be over for at least the foreseeable future, Snooty explained. The only hauling you will be doing will be within the boundaries of Marcellus atmosphere. Then fuck it. Put me back down there. I don't want to go home. The three quickly looked at each other, and although Clav didn't notice, there was a brief flash of panic in their eyes. It was the lizard who spoke up quickly. Well, what if we didn't want you here? What if we recognise that it's more of a punishment to you if we send you back home, and by far more of an inconvenience for us to keep you in our custody? Just remember, Mr. Hopper, that it's us who is in control of your destiny after all. Fine, and send me home, and see if you can keep me on the planet. I'd like to see you try. I'm supposed to be out there among the stars. It's my fake. And it's most definitely me who is in charge of my fucking density. Whether it's your fate or not, Mr. Hopper, Stern leaned forward, I'm afraid that it is out of your control. We will send you home, and you will be tagged, and you will have to sign in regularly. There will be no buck in the system, or else next time your punishment would be a lot more demanding than you have ever experienced. He sat back, crossed his hands together in his lap, a smug little grin on his face. For as long as you remain a criminal lowlife, we will make your life a living hell. Hey, there's no need to discriminate me just because I'm a criminal. Oh, I think there's every need, Stern nodded. Now, if you don't mind, Mr. Hopper, your shuttle will be leaving in the next 10 minutes, and you will be on it.